Evening. We are studying the book of Proverbs, and I'm going to pull up, I think I'm going to do like I did last week, or maybe that was Sunday. So we're studying Proverbs, and we're looking at it, just by way of reminder, topically. Got these 5 major topics, headings, and subtopics for each one. And we've been looking at leadership / authority is what I've called this one. And it's not the last one of our self and God first major section. However, the next or the last 2 subsections of this one are lengthy. You've got one that is it here? No, it's the next page here. Wisdom personified. And so rather than just reading you verses and me just taking the class reading the verses, not that that's a bad thing, obviously, but that's something that anybody could just read through the verses. So I will probably give you the references, and I may even at some point I could print those out if you want them printed out just all together. I got it down. It's pretty small print, but I've got it on one page. And then the other subsection is I just called it the blessings of wisdom. Again, these are pretty self-explanatory verses. There's just not a whole lot of comment to make on them. And so for the sake of time, again, I could just read those, but that's essentially what we'd be doing is just reading through them. But again, I've got them condensed down to one page. It's little. I don't mind sharing that electronically either, by the way, so you can actually zoom in if you want to and make it bigger. But that way they're all put together and you're not just flipping, all over the book of Proverbs. But I think I'm going to do those 2 subsections that way, and that way we can move on into our next major section instead of me just reading the verses, because there's just not a whole lot of comment to make on these. But wisdom personified is just wisdom crying out to, essentially, as it were, crying out to us as the listener, the reader, saying, listen to me, I'm trying to help you have the best possible life. And in the case of chapter 1, what happens when people don't listen to wisdom? But it's pictured as a lady, and she's trying to dispense advice, and she's saying, just listen to me, and sometimes even put in direct opposition or what's the word? I think it's juxtaposition is another way of putting that, to the adulterous woman, the seductress that would seek to lure you away from the path of right, to lure you away from discretion, wisdom, and cause you to be in such a worse state here and obviously ultimately in eternity. Whereas wisdom is saying, I'm over here and I'm not going to deceive you. I'm not going to go through all the things like the seductress does. I'm just trying to tell you and reason with you how to have the best life. But you've got to make a choice. You can listen to her or you can listen to me, but there are consequences either way. But if you want the best life, she says, seek wisdom, follow after it, stay with her. So wisdom's personified in that way. But I can print those out if you want. I say it's tiny. I mean, it's probably maybe a 9-point font, so it is small, but it's readable, I think. And if you want that, I can even blessings of wisdom on one page, and our printer can do double-sided. And then on the other side, you can have wisdom personified. So if you want that, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just give the references. But I just decided on that for the sake of time. Now, let's pick up where we left off with leadership in chapter 29. I knew I wasn't in the right chapter. Chapter 29 is where we left off. And let me get there, and I'm going to... Junior, are you still back there? There he is. All right. Oh, never mind. I saw it pulled up. I don't even know why I asked you that. I think I should be able to cast to it. There we go. How's that, Brother Steve? How about now? You mean you couldn't read that before? Y'all shouldn't have said anything. I could have had some fun with that. All right, so chapter 29. Again, my cheat sheet is verses from the King James. I've got you two different translations up here if you want to look for comparison. Sometimes we'll stop and read those specifically to notice things. But we notice chapter 29, verse 2, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked bear rule, the people mourn. And we talked about that in comparing two verses in the book of Esther, one where you have this idea of when a wicked man rules, the people groan, or when the wicked rule, the people groan, or as it is here in the King James, mourn. You've got the king making this decree that the Jews can be destroyed, and it says the decree went out, and the city of Shushan was just perplexed. People are just kind of like, what? And then you've got when things are made right, at the end of the book, there's this rejoicing. And so you see kind of an illustration of 29:2. 29:4, king by judgment establisheth the land, but he that receiveth gifts, bribes, overthroweth it. And so the idea there of leaders need to be impartial, they need to be fair. And then 29 verse 8, scornful men bring a city into a snare. The New King James has scoffers set a city aflame. And that is a powerful illustration. Then 29:12 through 14 is actually where we left off. I want to mention those others just by way of review because they're all here in this same chapter. So he says, if a ruler hearken to lies, all his servants are wicked. The poor and the deceitful man meet together. The Lord lighteneth both their eyes. The king that faithfully judgeth the poor, his throne shall be established forever. Sorry, I keep forgetting to scroll. The poor man and the deceitful man there from verse 13, you can see here in the New King James, it has the poor man and the oppressor. ESV has the same thing. That's a little bit better rendering as far as how we would say that. The poor man and the oppressor meet together, but the Lord lighteneth both their eyes. That last phrase, and I was desperately trying last week to get through this, and we were running out of time, had run out of time, I think, as I recall, and I was desperately trying to get through this, and I might have been tempted to do so, and then I realized, well, we still got two more verses in Proverbs 29, so I just said, I'm just going to give it up, and we'll pick it up next week. But this, to remind you of what we said about verse 12, if a ruler hearken to lies, all his servants are wicked. And again, I like New King James here. If a ruler pays attention to lies, all his servants become wicked. And I've got that note here in my notes. All his servants are wicked because he's going to surround himself with that kind of people. If he's listening to lies, then guess who he's surrounded himself with? Liars. Those are wicked people. I think we touched on it right before we ran out of time, but what immediately came to my mind was, we did talk about it a little bit, was Micaiah, the prophet. 2 Chronicles 18:4, there's a parallel is in, I wrote it down. Oh, come on. I wrote this down somewhere in my notes. 1 Kings 22, there it is. 1 Kings 22, 2 Chronicles 18, parallel passages where you've got Jehoshaphat. He's formed this alliance with with Ahab. Jehoshaphat, king of Judah in the south, formed this alliance with Ahab, king of the north, the northern kingdom Israel. And it's kind of, really it's just a whole lot of show, pomp and circumstance. oh, let's bring the prophets in and find out what the gods have to say about us going to this battle. And all of Ahab's prophets of Baal come in, and oh, Baal says, go and prosper. You're gonna win. You're gonna be victorious. And they're just telling him what he wants to hear, of course. They know that's what he wants to hear. He wants to go to battle. He wants to go try to conquer Syria. And so that's exactly what they tell him. And Jehoshaphat, foolish as he was for the alliance itself, he does at least say, well, is there not a prophet of Jehovah? We can ask him. And, Ahab's, well, there's Micaiah. I hate that guy. I mean, he says, I hate him because he doesn't ever say anything good about me. Well, why would he do that? Because there really wasn't much good to say about Ahab. In fact, from a very young age, when I was up at Greens Lake Road, I used to teach the Pew Packers class, and I had those kids, they knew. I mean, I could ask them, one of the most wicked kings that we read about in all of Scripture. And I mean, they knew that. In fact, they kind of, I don't know if it was one of mine that started it or one of the other ones, but before long, they all said it. They didn't answer King Ahab. They would say, mean old King Ahab. And that became the pat answer. I mean, I could ask them that, and it was like clockwork. They'd say, mean old King Ahab. But my kids knew that from a very young age. We'd do Bible time. Sometimes we'd go through our Bible questions and things like that. Ahab, no wonder Micaiah didn't have good things to say about him. It wasn't because Micaiah is just, oh man, he's just so negative. He just doesn't like Ahab. No, it was because Ahab was wicked. And on one occasion, in fact, the prophet Elijah goes to Ahab. And how did Ahab greet him? Oh, here comes the troubler of Israel. And I tell you what, Elijah was a man of God, and he was a man who loved God, and he loved people. But he gave it right back to Ahab, didn't he? What was his response? He says, you're the troubler of Israel. You and your father and your idols. That you want to know what's troubling Israel? Your godless, wicked behavior. And you're leading an entire nation into that nonsense. You want to talk about the cause of problems in Israel? Let's talk about that, Ahab. I mean, he's not taking it for a minute. He's not kind of like, well, don't say that. That's not nice. He just gives it right back. He says, you're the troubler of Israel. You're idolatry. So, and there's so much more we can say about Ahab, but yes, sir.
There is a lesson here. You cannot rise above your leadership.
That's right. We often say that. Whether it's in a congregation, it happens oftentimes, business, schools, nations, don't rise above the leadership. And there's so much in the books of Kings and Chronicles, and sometimes we think, if we're not careful, we just get lost in the history of that and like, well, why is this there? I guess, maybe God's just kind of showing us how we got to the Messiah, and it is all ultimately leading to the Messiah, and that's what it's all pointing toward. But don't miss some of the lessons along the way that God is trying to teach us, and that's one of them, is that bad leadership, it can ruin an entire nation. Just as we've already noticed in this section, in fact, it was, not the second verse in this subsection. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. So Ahab surrounded himself with yes men. They all say go to battle. Of course, the rest of the story is they eventually call Micaiah. Those false prophets of Baal tried to kind of goad Micaiah into just going along, like, come on, man, don't rock the boat. Just, he wants to go to battle. He's going to go to battle. You can almost hear him talking, trying to reason with him. He wants to go to battle. He's going to go to battle. Just go tell him to go to battle. That's what he wants to hear. Micaiah says, no, I'm going to say whatever the Lord tells me to say. And so he's not going to be a yes man. If a ruler hearkens to lies, all his servants are wicked, because that's who he surrounds himself with. Verse 13, again, oppressor is better there for a deceitful man. The poor and the oppressor meet together. But that last phrase I want to notice, the Lord lighteneth both their eyes. They have this in common. The Lord gives light to the eyes of both, is how the New King James puts that. Very, very similar in the ESV. That last phrase, though, it seems to be indicating that God gives instruction to both. God gives certain blessings to both. What does Jesus say in Matthew 5:45 about the blessings of God, particularly rain and sun? Come on the just and on the unjust. There are some blessings that you can be a person that, as it were, shakes his fist at God and says, I don't want anything to do with you. You could be a person that, and they're out there, sadly, that hates God. But it's not like God's going to say, well, all right, you just see if you get any rain. And it's going to rain all around your neighbors, and your little garden spot or your little area is just not going to get rained on. Or the sun's just not going to shine on you. There are certain blessings of God that come on the just and the unjust. Now, we talk about spiritual blessings, all spiritual blessings in Christ, Ephesians 1:3. Those are not available to anyone except those who are in Christ. But there are some blessings that come upon all. So that seems to be the idea here. God also gives the same instruction to all. It's not like anybody can stand before God in the day of judgment and say, well, it's your fault. You didn't tell me what to do. Have you ever been in that situation, by the way, where somebody else is in authority and you get in trouble, maybe you get let go, and you just really never were given instruction on what to do? Years ago, I was in college before I'd even gone to preaching school. I worked a job at Walmart for about 90 days. And at the end of the 90 days, they say, well, that's kind of how a lot of companies will do. You work 90 days, and during that time, they say, hey, if you want to quit for any reason, that's your choice. If we decide we don't want you for any reason, that's our choice. And then, after the 90 days, I don't know, it's supposed to be more difficult. I guess that's debatable. But at the end of my 90 days, they just said, it's just not working out, was the way my supervisor sat down with me, and she said, it's just not working out. And I was like, really? And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like 18 years old. I'm like, I think I'm getting fired. And I'm like, this has never happened before. So I'm sort of, in my naivety, I'm like, why? And she said, well, you're just not a team player. I said, what does that mean, not a team player? I'm like trying to get some, like, even dumb 18-year-old Chad is intelligent enough that I recognize stupid lingo for when you don't want to give an explanation. And I was picking up what she was putting down. So I was like, what does that mean? Well, then she finds like, Chad, you're just not getting your work done. And she starts talking about this was not right, that's not right. I said, well, ma'am, do you realize that y'all never trained me? Honestly, I felt like I didn't even realize my 90 days was up. It kind of snuck up on me. But I said, honestly, I'm sitting here thinking back, and I'm like, I think I'm doing pretty good for a guy that never really got trained on how to do this. Well, I think you had. And I said, no, I didn't. Remember? Well, you were setting me up, and I forget all the details, but it was one of those like, we'll get you set up with so-and-so. They're going to show you and get you, make sure you know the ropes and stuff. And I didn't get set up with so-and-so. I got set up with this other lady, and she was grumpy. I was telling you, I remember her. And it wasn't in her itinerary to train this young fella. And she just wouldn't. Sometimes she'd tell me that. She'd say, just give it here. And then she'd go do it. And I'm like, well, my point with all that is I never got trained. And, yeah, there were things I could have done differently and should have done better. But that was a frustration to me, and I was really, really just sort of put out and shocked and aggravated because I felt like, okay, you're letting me go because I'm not doing the job right, but you never showed me how to do the job right. And folks, there's not a person that can stand before God in the day of judgment and say, Well, you know what? I would have done your will, God, if you just told me what it was. How can anybody know? I mean, you're God, I'm human. How can anybody know your mind? Can't read your mind. We sometimes say that to people. And God will say, I told you exactly what was on my mind. I revealed to you. I remember in Micah, was it chapter 6? Read it just a few Sundays ago. He showed thee, O man, what is good. What does the Lord your God require? Leading up to that, he says, well, should I come before the Lord with calves? Hundreds of calves? Rams? Thousands of rivers of oil? Even to the point of the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Even like contemplating, should I be offering my child? Which is just abominable in the sight of God. He's never called for human sacrifice. He says, he showed thee, O man, what is good. What does the Lord thy God require? To do justice, righteousness, and you walk humbly with your God. And so God's saying, hey, look, the poor man, the oppressor, you might be so wealthy you could just oppress people and keep them right under your thumb. You might be just poor as dirt. You got the same instruction from God. You got the same opportunity to reach and obtain eternal blessings from God. Well, what do we do with that? Are we going to take advantage of that? Or just leave that book on a shelf gathering dust? Bob had given me a script. I don't know, it's probably been a year or two ago, but I haven't aired it on the radio yet. It's actually airing, I think it's in the next week or two it'll be on the social media spots. But it was a just a minute script that he had written, and he told me, he said, if you need to truncate it or change it up or whatever, make it fit, that's fine. So I did alter it a little bit, but it's essentially Bob's script, and it was talking about Josiah and this book that they found. And how that many homes in our country, in our world, there's a book, a lost book. It's not lost because, we just don't know where it is. It's lost because it's just kind of forgotten. Sometimes it's gathering dust. So often it's just not opened. And just like in Josiah's day, they opened it and they started following it, and a great revival took place. And it can happen that way in our homes, our individual lives, our homes, our congregations, and even to the point of an entire nation, as we saw there with Josiah. Tim, you were going to say something.
To this point, Luke 16, 19 through 31 is so big.
Yes.
Two individuals, one fared sumptuously, the other one was a beggar. Both of them died. We know nothing about their exposure to the truth. Both of them died. The rich man is in torment, and the beggar man is in paradise. And the rich man makes the claim, Father Abraham, just send someone back to my family.
Yeah.
And he makes the point, no, they have Moses and the prophets. In other words, there's no special cadence to making sure Chad hears this. He will receive it just like everyone else did.
Yep. And he even says, but if somebody went from the dead, they would listen. And that's Father Abraham's response is, so if they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't be persuaded even if one rose from the dead. That's a great illustration of this passage here, 29:12 through 14, especially verse 13 there. Man, that's a good one because, here you have the very wealthy, the very poor. And he says, you both had that same opportunity. And your 5 brethren, they got that same opportunity. And it's just, what are they going to do with it? And man, that's a very good parallel to put with that. And then verse 14, the king that faithfully judgeth the poor, his throne shall be established forever. And I've got a cross-reference here to Proverbs 16:12. Usually I've got these. Oh, there it is. It is an abomination to kings to commit wickedness, for the throne is established by righteousness. The throne being established by righteousness. The king faithfully judging the poor. His throne will be established forever because it's being established by righteousness. He's faithfully judging. 29:19 is the next verse here. It says, a servant will not be corrected by words, for though he understand, he will not answer. And this is interesting because I think it helps to put it with verse 18. The New King James here has, where there is no revelation. If you got a King James, you'll see there's no vision. And sometimes people kind of use this verse. It's out of context, I guess, in the immediate sense, but I still think the application is there as long as we are careful about that. But sometimes people will talk about vision. We need to have vision like planning ahead. Vision in that sense, because it's like Proverbs says, chapter 29, without vision, the people perish. Well, the problem is, in the immediate context here, that statement, without vision, planning ahead, thinking ahead, that kind of thing, the people perish. That is very true. But in this immediate context, he's talking about revelation. Vision, as in sometimes you'll turn to the prophets, and it'll say the vision of, and it'll give the prophet's name who's the inspired writer of that prophecy. So bear that in mind. That's what's being talked about here is revelation. In fact, there's a footnote there. Will that pop up on the screen? I think it will. Whoops. If I can get, there you go. So vision, prophetic vision. Where there's no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint or perish. In other words, no instruction, people just going to do whatever they want. In fact, it reminds us of Judges 21:25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what? What was right in his own eyes. And that's why it's the dark ages, we often call it, of Israel's history. So where there's no prophetic vision, ESV says the people cast off restraint. Again, very similar. I don't know what the footnote is here, or the people are discouraged. But back to the verse that we're looking at here in verse 19. The servant will not be corrected by words, for though he understand, he will not answer. It seems to be referring to one who knows, he understands. It's not somebody that they just don't get it, whether it be inability to get it or just ignorance, things they haven't heard on this yet. This is somebody who full well knows. They understand, but they don't obey. And so do you know what it takes for a person like that? I mean, Billy's mama could tell us. Right, Billy? My mom could tell you. I mean, you got a kid sometimes that they know good and well what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do. They understand, and they decide to do it anyway. That's not the time for talk. That's not the time to say, now, sweetie, let's sit down, let's talk about this. And I'm just going to tell you, I can tell you as a parent and as an observer, it ain't the time for talking. And we do children a disservice when we just sit there and say, well, now let's talk about this. Grandmother Dollahite, I can remember her getting so angry, like her and my grandmother on my mom's side both, they would get just as angry telling a story from 50 years ago as if it were happening right then. And it was beautiful. I just loved it. It would make me laugh. I would get so tickled at them. But she would talk about, oh, Charles, he would do this and that. And I'd tell him, you just wait till your daddy gets home and you're in trouble. And so, she would tell Paw about it. And then next thing you know, she said, I'd hear him in there and he'd say, now, Daddy, you can whoop me, but first let's talk about it. And she said, sure enough, he'd talk his way right out of that whooping. Well, sometimes you're past talking about it, and there needs to be correction. And that doesn't, I'm not saying that always needs to be the Board of Education applied to the seat of knowledge, but that is pretty effective most of the time. But correction. Yes, sir.
My father believed in stern discipline. I furnished the stern, and he furnished the discipline.
Yeah. So But yeah, that's the idea there in 19. Here's a person that they know, they understand, they just don't obey, and that's a person that needs corrective discipline. And that's in opposition to the instruction. That's the reason I tied that with verse 18, because where there's no prophetic vision, people cast off restraint. Well, what about when there is prophetic vision? There is instruction from God, and you still have somebody that they just go, I'll do whatever I want. That's a person, there's going to have to be some corrective discipline. Proverbs 29:26. Many seek the ruler's favor, but every man's judgment cometh from the Lord. This is it seems to be an illustration of verse 23. You back up, or 25. Make sure I got that right. Sometimes it's hard to read my own writing. Verse 25, the fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe. Well, many seek the ruler's favor, but justice for man comes from the Lord. In other words, the fear of man brings a snare. A lot of people are playing up to a man, a human, as if that's going to save them. But real justice, true justice in that ultimate sense, is going to come from the Lord. Whoever trusts in the Lord will be safe. And again, that's, bearing in mind truisms. And it may also be thinking in terms of, in the ultimate sense, safe. Doesn't mean nothing bad will ever happen in that sense. I had a note on this verse. But my note here is, again, it's an illustration of verse 25, fearing or respecting government more so than God. It seems to be the idea there. It's not to say that we shouldn't fear or respect government. In fact, Romans 13, we looked at that a 3 weeks ago as we began this section on authority. We need to respect government. We need to fear government in one sense, but not over God. This last phrase here, every man's judgment cometh from the Lord, seems to indicate that God alone renders true justice 100% of the time. In other words, men may, with all good intentions, with all sincerity, still get it wrong. And they do from time to time. I mean, we've probably, most of us in here, vast majority of us in here, probably seen shows on TV about a guy that was convicted. Maybe we even know personally somebody who was convicted, sent to prison, maybe served some hard time, and it came out later, they didn't do it. And the justice system failed them. And that's tragic. And I would never take away from the tragedy of that. However, at the same time, well, of course, the justice system is carried out, it's written by and carried out by humans. So there are times when it's going to fall short. But you know who 100% of the time, without fail, will render absolute, fair justice? Is Jehovah God. Every time. There's never been a time when he said, oops, got that one wrong. If I'd have slowed down a little bit. You ever been there? You rush to judgment on something? Maybe even, again, I've had it happen as a parent before. Find out a little more information later and you go, oh, I wish I'd have slowed down a little bit and found that out first, and maybe now I need to go apologize to a kid. But that happens. But it doesn't with God. 100% of the time, all day, every day, he will render true justice. So fear him, respect and love him, obey him, because he will always treat you fairly, he will always treat you right, and he will always seek your good. Sometimes you have secular leaders that are dishonest. Sometimes they're partial. Sometimes even when they're trying to do what's right, they make mistakes. He says, stay with God. You can't go wrong. And I'm reminded, I had a note here, Matthew 10:28. Don't fear those that kill the body but can't destroy the soul. rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. God's going to do what's right. So fear him, serve him, love him, obey him, and so on. Bob, you were going to say something?
We have public schools in session now. Each morning, there's a routine called Pledge to the Flag. And what's the last line?
One nation under God.
Under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Why are our young people asked to recite that? Because without God, our government's not going to be able to have the effect and the influence it needs to. Our home's not going to be. A classroom's not going to be. Do you know a few years ago there was a group of people who wanted to push the pledge out of the public school system? It's that same mindset that Proverbs is speaking against. If you remove God from the culture's going to go into chaos.
Yeah.
So the answer is put God in everything that you do.
Yeah, and I mean, that's over and over again. You see it in Proverbs. You take God out of the equation for the nation, for the individual, for the family, schools, whatever. It's going to cause chaos and ultimately ruin. And again, you see a lot of that too, by the way, when you see these wisdom personified passages. So that's a good thought there as well. All right, so let's go to Proverbs 30. And I thought we were going to get into our next section here, but this section on leadership, I'm telling you, it's rich, and I have really, really enjoyed just this little subsection part of our study. Proverbs 30, verse, I was going to say that one doesn't look right, 21. That belongs to a different section, talking about the adulteress. For three things, he says, oh yeah, okay, I thought I was looking at the wrong verse. For three things the earth is disquieted, verse 21 begins, and for four which it cannot bear. For a servant when he reigneth, and a fool when he is filled with meat, and it goes on and describes the others. But I'm just keying in on that phrase, for a servant when he reigneth. Again, the idea here, we talked about this in a previous verse dealing with leadership. It's not saying a servant is worthless and, he's just somehow, it's not some kind of prejudicial statement or whatever. But here's what, I think this comes from Clark. He describes it might be Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, I can't remember for sure, but described as an unprincipled tyrant. And he puts this term slave in quotes. Slave in terms of morality, as opposed to, it's really hard to read my writing here, as opposed to social status. Servant or slave, it's not talking about his social standing. It's talking about his moral behavior, his character. And so that's the meaning when it says, for three things the earth is disquieted, and for four which it cannot bear, a servant when he reigns. Because there are those who might be a servant in social standing. They might be a slave in social standing. And yet, they are far more sometimes capable and men of character than those who are actually in leadership and are high on the social scale. So keep that in mind. That's what's being talked about here is the morality, the character of the individual. Now, same chapter 30, drop down to verse 29. A lot of different little comparisons that are made in this chapter, and sometimes it'll say for three, even for four, and so on. And some of these we've even studied in sermons before. But in 29, three things majestic in pace is the way the New King James starts off. King James says, there be three things which go well, yea, four are comely in going. A lion which is strongest among beasts, and turneth not away for any. A greyhound, and he-goat also, and a king against whom there is no rising up. There are a lot of these phrases here that in the Hebrew are very difficult, and a lot of commentators spend a lot of time trying to talk about, well, what is this? We don't know for sure. You've got, obviously, the lion, but you have, and you can see us here on your screen, greyhound, like the King James is what the New King James has, but in the ESV it's got it translated as the strutting rooster. But you see the footnote there in the New King James, exact identity, unknown. Probably same thing over here in the ESV, magpie or greyhound, Hebrew, girt of loins. So it's just uncertain. But the Old King James has, as far as this king, and this is the phrase we're looking at for our section here, a king against whom there is no rising up. But you see, believe both, ESV and New King James have very similar language. A king whose army is with him, ESV, whose troops are with him. But the idea here is simply that it's the glory of a king. And I have a cross-reference here, and I think I typed it out so I can get to it quicker. No, I didn't, of course. 2 Samuel. I'll just look it up here so I don't lose my spot. There was a phrase in 2 Samuel 5 that, and I thought I had printed that verse out. I apologize. Chapter 5, verse 12. David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. So the idea there being David perceived God has established him, and so there's this king who's established, and it's stately, majestic in pace is the way the New King James puts it in verse 29, stately in their tread. And so a leader who's established by God, meaning he's a godly leader. And that is, it's kind of like the wise man is saying, man, that's a beautiful thing. That is just something about a guy that's with his troops. He's established on the throne, but he's not just ruling a bunch of troops. He's a person who cares about people. He cares about God first and foremost. That seems to be the idea. And then finally, last passage here, and we better hurry, 31, 1 through 9. I'll read these verses and make just some quick comments. The words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. What, my son? And what, the son of my womb? And what, the son of my vows? Give not thy strength unto women, nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings. As you can guess, we'll come back to this passage again in other sections. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink. We covered this when we studied alcohol. Lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted. Give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish, and wine unto those that be of heavy hearts. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. Open thy mouth for the dumb and the cause of all such as are appointed to destruction. For the mute, those who can't speak up for themselves, in other words. Or if ever there was a verse to oppose abortion, that would be it. Open thy mouth for the dumb and the cause of all such as are appointed to destruction. Open thy mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy. And I have really two notes here, and then we'll just stop there and go into our next major section, God willing, next week. These first several verses down through about verse 7, you've got two tremendous, dangerous, deadly pitfalls of leadership. Wine and women. That's still just as true. And man, if I had a nickel, even in just 2 years of preaching school, how many times instructors would say, watch out, fellas. These are things that'll get you. And here you've got Lemuel's mother saying, son, I'm telling you, here's two things you better keep your eyes open and steer clear of. I mean, don't go near it. Don't go in the vicinity of it. You see it way over there. You run as far away from it in the other direction as you can. Because those are two things, wine and women, that will get you. And they are pitfalls of leaders. And verses 8 and 9 are two great, tremendous, massive needs of leadership. I mean, what you really need to see in leaders. Justice and benevolence. You show me a leader without compassion, and I will show you a terrible joke of a leader. Really not a leader at all, just a tyrant. You take away compassion, all you have is a tyrant. If you take away justice, you just have a dictator. You just have somebody that's just trying to conquer and rule and oppress. Man, the two great needs of leadership there that are described at least here in this section, justice and benevolence, and those two major pitfalls, wine and women. Yes, sir.
Samuel had two sons. That was their flaw.
Yeah,
And it led to the children of Israel asking for a king.
absolutely. And that's partially why the kingdom ends up being established, not because, oh, well, we want to have a godly king or whatever. We want somebody like the nations. And, oh, by the way, what we really don't want is your boys, because all they care about is wine and women. I mean, yeah, that's it. That nails it right there. Thank y'all so much. God willing, next week we'll get into our next major section. We're going to jump into the section on speech. I was torn on what to go to next, and I said, hey, Landon, what do you think I should do next? And he said, do the section on speech. So if y'all don't like that, you just have to take it up with Landon. I'm sorry. Thank y'all very much. We'll start that, Lord willing, next week.